The stage rocked to a halt in front of the dusty Mercantile, and Katherine Langley stepped down onto the dirt street of Hawthorne, Nevada, clutching her carpetbag and a rolled piece of paper that would change everything she thought she knew about her future. It was late August in 1882, and the desert heat wrapped around her like a wool blanket despite the lightweight traveling dress she wore. Katherine had spent 3 weeks journeying from Boston, her heart filled with equal parts hope and terror at the prospect of meeting the man she would marry. Harold Ashford had written her such beautiful letters, his words painting pictures of a life they would build together on his cattle ranch just outside this small mining town. He had been honest about the hard work, but his descriptions of Nevada's vast skies and rugged beauty had captured her imagination completely. She was 22 years old, orphaned 2 years prior, when consumption took both her parents within months of each other. The boarding house where she had worked as a seamstress was closing, and the prospect of finding respectable employment in Boston had dimmed with each passing week. When her friend Margaret showed her the advertisement for a bride, Katherine had hesitated only a moment before writing her first letter to Harold Ashford. Now, standing in the middle of a town that consisted of little more than a main street lined with wooden buildings, Katherine searched the handful of people visible for a man matching Harold's description. He had written that he was tall, with dark hair and broad shoulders from years of ranch work. He would be 30 years old now, 7 years her senior, which seemed perfectly reasonable. A woman emerged from the Mercantile, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. "You must be Miss Langley," she said warmly. "I am Martha Henderson. My husband runs the Mercantile. Harold asked us to watch for the stage." "Yes, I am Katherine Langley," Katherine said, relief flooding through her. "Is Mr. Ashford here?" "He is finishing some business at the telegraph office, but he should be along shortly," Martha said, reaching for Katherine's bag. "Come inside where it is cooler. You must be exhausted from your journey." Katherine followed Martha into the Mercantile, grateful for the relative coolness inside. The shop smelled of coffee, leather, and something sweet she could not quite place. Martha gestured to a chair near the counter. "Please sit. Would you like some water?" "Yes, thank you," Katherine said, sinking onto the chair. Her legs ached from the long journey, and her dress was hopelessly wrinkled despite her best efforts. Martha brought her a tin cup of cool water, and Katherine drank gratefully. As she set the cup down, the rolled paper she had been clutching shifted in her other hand. She had picked it up at a way station 2 days ago, merely out of boredom while waiting for the stage to be repaired. The stack of wanted posters had been sitting on a table, and she had idly looked through them, her curiosity getting the better of her. Her blood had turned to ice when she saw the face staring back at her from one of those posters. The drawing was crude, as such things often were, but there was no mistaking those features. The strong jaw, the straight nose, the set of the eyes. Above the image, bold letters proclaimed, "Wanted for murder. Reward $500. Harrison Adler. Last seen in Carson City, Nevada, Harrison Adler, not Harold Ashford." Katherine had stared at that poster for 10 full minutes, her mind racing. Could it be a mistake? Could there be 2 men with such similar features? But the more she studied it, the more certain she became. The age matched. The location was correct. Even the description of his height and build aligned perfectly with what Harold had told her. She had folded the poster and tucked it into her bag, unsure what to do with this information. Perhaps she should have turned back, but she had no money for a return ticket and nowhere to go even if she could afford one. Besides, she told herself, there could still be some mistake. She would see him first, speak with him, learn the truth before making any decisions. Now that moment was nearly upon her, and her heart hammered in her chest. "Are you feeling well, dear?" Martha asked, concern evident in her voice. "You have gone quite pale." "Just the heat," Katherine managed to say. "And the long journey." "Of course," Martha said sympathetically. "Harold is a good man. You will be very happy here, I am certain of it. He has worked so hard to prepare his home for you. He speaks of nothing else these past few weeks." Katherine wanted to believe that. She wanted to think that the man who had written her such thoughtful letters could not possibly be a murderer. But the poster burned in her carpetbag like a hot coal. The door opened, and a man stepped inside. Katherine's breath caught. He was exactly as he had described himself, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He wore clean denim trousers, a dark shirt, and a leather vest. His boots were dusty but well-maintained. He removed his hat as he entered, and his eyes found Katherine immediately. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. His expression was open and hopeful, with just a trace of nervousness that made him seem more human somehow. "Miss Langley," he said, his voice deeper than she had imagined but warm. "I am Harold Ashford. I cannot tell you how glad I am that you arrived safely." Katherine stood on unsteady legs. This was the moment. She could smile and greet him as though nothing were wrong. She could go through with the wedding and hope that the poster was somehow a mistake. Or she could confront him now, in front of Martha Henderson, and demand the truth. Her hand moved almost of its own accord, reaching into her bag and withdrawing the rolled poster. She unfolded it with shaking fingers and held it up. Harold Ashford froze. The color drained from his face, and his entire body went rigid. His eyes fixed on the poster, and Katherine saw recognition flash across his features, followed quickly by something that looked like resignation and fear. "What is this?" Katherine asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the trembling in her hands. Martha gasped softly behind her, but Katherine kept her gaze locked on the man before her. Harold's throat worked as he swallowed. His knuckles went white where he gripped his hat. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Where did you find that?" "At a way station," Katherine said. "Is it true? Are you Harrison Adler?" The silence that followed stretched for what felt like hours. Katherine could hear the clock ticking on the wall behind the counter, the distant sound of a wagon rolling past outside. Martha had gone completely still. Finally, Harold took a slow breath and met Katherine's eyes directly. "Yes," he said, "that is my real name. But I am not what that poster says I am. I did not murder anyone." Katherine's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to remain standing. "Then why does this poster exist? Why did you lie to me about your name?" "Because no one would believe me if I told them the truth," Harold said, his voice raw with emotion. "Because I have been running for 2 years, trying to stay ahead of a lie that will get me hanged if the law catches up with me." "Martha, perhaps you should give us some privacy," Katherine said quietly, never taking her eyes from Harold. "I will be in the back room if you need me," Martha said, her voice tight with concern. Katherine heard her footsteps retreat, and then she and Harold were alone. "Tell me everything," Katherine said, "and it better be the truth, because I will know if you are lying." Harold set his hat on the counter with a careful movement, as though buying himself time to gather his thoughts. Then he began to speak. 2 years ago, I was working as a foreman on a ranch outside Carson City. The owner, a man named Edmund Price, trusted me to manage the cattle operation and the men who worked it. I had been there for 5 years, and I was good at my job. Mr. Price treated me fairly, and I had saved enough money to start thinking about buying my own land. He paused, his jaw tightening. Mr. Price had a business partner, a man named Victor Sutton. I never liked Sutton. He was cruel to the ranch hands and was always scheming for ways to make more money with less work. He and Mr. Price argued often about how to run things. Katherine listened, trying to read the truth in his face. One night in July, there was a terrible fight. I heard shouting from Mr. Price's office in the main house. I went to see if everything was all right, and I found Mr. Price on the floor, bleeding from a gunshot wound to the chest. Sutton was standing over him with a smoking pistol in his hand. Harold's voice cracked slightly. I rushed in to help Mr. Price, but it was too late. He died in my arms. Sutton looked at me and I saw him calculating. Then he shouted for help, claiming that I had shot Mr. Price, that he had walked in to find me robbing the office. But surely there were witnesses, Katherine said. Surely someone would have heard the shot and known you were not the first to arrive. The ranch hands were all in the bunkhouse celebrating one man's birthday. They were drunk and loud, and the main house was a good distance away. By the time they arrived, Sutton had his story set. He said he saw me fleeing, that he had wrestled the gun from me, and I had run. Harold's hands clenched into fists. There was nothing I could say that would convince them otherwise. Sutton was a respected businessman. I was just a foreman, and worse, the gun that killed Mr. Price was my gun. Sutton must have stolen it from my room earlier. So you ran, Katherine said. What choice did I have? They would have hanged me. I took my horse and whatever I could carry, and I rode. I changed my name, moved around for a while, and finally settled here in Hawthorne about 8 months ago. I bought a small ranch with the money I had saved, kept my head down, and tried to build a new life. Katherine studied him carefully. His story sounded plausible and the pain in his voice seemed genuine. But could she trust him? Why did you send for a bride? That seems risky if you are trying to hide. Because I was lonely, Harold admitted. Because I am tired of running and hiding. Because I wanted something good in my life again, something real. When I wrote to you, Katherine, every word was true. My feelings, my hopes for our future together, all of it. The only lie was my name. Katherine looked down at the wanted poster in her hands. $500 was a significant reward. That money could set her up comfortably, perhaps allow her to open her own dress shop somewhere. All she had to do was turn him in to the local sheriff. But as she looked at Harold's face, she saw a man who was genuinely afraid, not of being caught, but of her judgment. She saw a man who had written her letters full of kindness and hope. Could a murderer fake that so convincingly? I want to believe you, Katherine said slowly, but I have risked everything to come here. My whole future depends on making the right choice. How can I know you are telling the truth? Harold spread his hands helplessly. I do not know how to prove my innocence to you. All I can offer is my word and my actions. Let me show you the kind of man I am, Katherine. Give me a chance to prove that the man you corresponded with is the real me, not the criminal that poster claims I am. Katherine folded the poster carefully and placed it back in her bag. Her mind was spinning. I need time to think. This is not what I expected when I stepped off that stage. I understand, Harold said. Martha can set you up in a room at the boarding house. Take all the time you need. I will not pressure you for an answer. But you understand that I could go to the sheriff right now, Katherine said, testing him. Yes, Harold said simply. And I would not blame you if you did, but I am asking you not to, at least not yet. Get to know me first, then make your decision. There was something in his directness that appealed to Katherine. A guilty man might have tried to charm her or threaten her. Instead, Harold was being remarkably honest about the precariousness of his situation. All right, Katherine said. I will stay at the boarding house tonight. Tomorrow I want you to show me your ranch. I want to see how you live. And I want more details about what happened in Carson City. Relief flickered across Harold's face. "Thank you. I will come for you in the morning if that is acceptable." Martha emerged from the back room, having clearly been listening. "I will take you to the boarding house myself, dear. Mrs. Cooper runs a clean establishment." As Katherine followed Martha out into the dusty street, she glanced back to see Harold still standing in the mercantile, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Despite everything, she felt a tug of sympathy for him. Whether he was innocent or guilty, he was clearly carrying a heavy burden. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure at the end of the main street. Mrs. Cooper, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, showed Katherine to a small but clean room on the second floor. After Martha left, Katherine sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to process everything that had happened. She had traveled 3 weeks to marry a man who was either innocent of a terrible crime or guilty and hiding behind a false name. Either way, her future hung in the balance. If she turned him in and he was truly innocent, she would be destroying a good man's life. If she married him and he was guilty, she would be binding herself to a murderer. Katherine pulled out the letters Harold had written to her over the past months. She read them again, looking for any hint of deception or violence. But all she found were thoughtful observations about ranch life, questions about her interests and dreams, and expressions of growing affection that had warmed her heart when she first read them. That night, Katherine barely slept. She watched the moon arc across her window and listened to the distant howl of coyotes. Somewhere in this small town, Harold was probably lying awake too, wondering if she would betray him. The morning arrived hot and bright. Katherine washed her face in the basin, braided her hair into a practical style, and put on her simplest dress. When she went downstairs, she found Harold waiting in the parlor, hat in hand. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Did you sleep well?" "Not particularly," Katherine admitted. "But I am ready to see your ranch." Harold had brought a wagon with a gentle-looking mare in the traces. He helped Katherine up onto the seat with a careful touch, as though afraid she might bolt. They rode in silence through Hawthorne's main street and out into the desert landscape beyond. The land here was nothing like Boston. Sagebrush stretched in every direction, punctuated by rocky outcrops and the occasional twisted tree. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the blue sky. The sun was already fierce, and Katherine was grateful for the bonnet that shaded her face. After about 30 minutes, they turned onto a narrow track that led to a cluster of buildings. The main house was modest but well constructed, made of wood with a covered porch that would provide shade in the afternoon. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and what looked like a chicken coop. "This is home," Harold said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "It is not much yet, but I have been working to improve it. I added the porch this spring, and I am planning to expand the house once I can afford more lumber." Katherine climbed down and walked slowly toward the house. Harold followed a few paces behind, giving her space to explore. The porch was swept clean, and there were even a few pots with struggling plants trying to grow despite the harsh climate. Inside, the house was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast iron stove, a sturdy table, and 2 chairs. There were curtains on the windows, plain but clean. A doorway led to what Katherine assumed was a bedroom. "I cleaned everything twice," Harold admitted. "I wanted it to be ready for you." Katherine ran her finger along the table. No dust. She opened the cupboard and found it stocked with basic supplies. Everything spoke of a man trying to make a good impression, to provide a decent home. "Tell me more about Carson City," Katherine said, turning to face him. "Tell me about Victor Sutton. Why would he kill his business partner?" Harold pulled out one of the chairs and sat, gesturing for Katherine to take the other. Mr. Price and Sutton had been partners for about 3 years, but they disagreed on almost everything. Mr. Price believed in treating the land and the cattle well, in building something sustainable. Sutton only cared about profit. He wanted to overgraze the land, sell off breeding stock for quick money, and cut corners wherever possible. The night Mr. Price died, I heard them arguing about a deal Sutton had made without Mr. Price's knowledge. Something about selling water rights to a mining company. Mr. Price was furious because it would have left the ranch without adequate water for the cattle. When I entered the office, I heard Sutton say something like, "Then we will just have to change the partnership terms." And then there was a gunshot. Katherine listened carefully, watching Harold's face for any sign that he was fabricating the story, but his eyes were distant, as though he were reliving that terrible night. After Mr. Price died and Sutton accused me, I was in shock. I did not run right away. I stood there trying to explain what I had seen. But Sutton was convincing, and the ranch hands wanted to believe him. He was their new boss, after all. When I realized they were going to lock me up and send for the marshal, I panicked and fled. Looking back, I know that made me look guilty. But I was terrified. "Where did you go first?" Katherine asked. "I rode east into the mountains. I hid out for a few days, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about going back, about trying to prove my innocence. But I had no evidence, no way to counter Sutton's story. So I kept moving, taking odd jobs, staying away from towns where there might be a marshal. Eventually, I made my way here to Hawthorne. It is small enough that people do not ask too many questions, but large enough that I can sell my cattle and buy supplies without drawing attention." Katherine considered this. "Has anyone recognized you? Has anyone questioned your identity?" "No," Harold said. "The wanted poster description is vague and the drawing does not look that much like me. Most people do not pay much attention to wanted posters unless they are actively hunting for bounties. I have been careful, kept to myself, and Harold Ashford has a clean record as far as anyone here knows." "Until I arrived with that poster," Katherine said. "Until you arrived with that poster," Harold agreed quietly. Katherine stood and walked to the window, looking out at the harsh, beautiful landscape. She thought about her options. She could still turn him in, collect the reward, and return to Boston, or perhaps start over somewhere else. Or she could take a leap of faith and believe in the man who had written her such hopeful letters. "If I stay," Katherine said slowly, "if I agree to marry you, I need you to promise me complete honesty from this moment forward. No more lies, not even small ones." "I am risking my entire future on your word." Harold stood, his expression intense. "I promise you, Katherine, no more lies. Whatever you ask me, I will answer truthfully. And if the law catches up with you, if someone else recognizes you, then I will face it," Harold said. "I will not run anymore. Running has not given me peace, just a different kind of prison. If I am caught, I will try to prove my innocence through proper legal means. But I want to stop looking over my shoulder. I want to build a real life, and I want to build it with you if you will have me." Katherine turned to face him fully. In the light streaming through the window, she could see the lines of stress around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried tension. This was a man who had been living in fear for 2 years. But underneath that, she could also see the person who had written her letters full of dreams about raising horses, about watching sunsets from this very porch, about building something lasting. "I will stay," Katherine said, and watched relief flood Harold's features. "But I am not ready to marry you immediately. I want time to truly know you, to see if the man I corresponded with is the man standing before me. And I am keeping that poster. If I ever have reason to doubt your innocence, I will use it." "That is more than fair," Harold said. "Thank you, Katherine." You will not regret this." "I hope not," Katherine said. "Now show me the rest of your ranch. If I am going to live here, I should know what I am getting into." Over the following hours, Harold showed Katherine every aspect of his small operation. He had about 50 head of cattle, a dozen horses of varying quality, and chickens that provided eggs. He explained his plans for improvement, showing her where he wanted to build a larger barn, where a vegetable garden might have a chance despite the climate, and how he hoped to eventually dig a well closer to the house. Katherine found herself impressed by his knowledge and work ethic. This was clearly a man who understood the land and the animals, who was willing to work hard to build something. It aligned with everything he had written in his letters. As the sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive, they returned to the house. Harold drew water from the well, and Katherine discovered he had even acquired a small icebox, currently empty but showing his intention to provide comforts. "I should take you back to the boarding house," Harold said, "but I would like to invite you for dinner tomorrow evening if you are willing. I am a decent cook, and I would like to continue showing you that I am a man worth trusting." "All right," Katherine agreed, "but I would like to spend some time in town as well, talking to people who know you. I want to hear what your neighbors think of Harold Ashford." "Ask anyone you like," Harold said. "I have nothing to hide, at least not as Harold." The ride back to town was more comfortable than the morning journey. They talked about small things: the weather, the differences between Nevada and Boston, the challenges of ranch life. Katherine found herself relaxing slightly, though the weight of the wanted poster in her bag never fully left her mind. Over the next week, Katherine did exactly as she had promised. She spoke with Martha Henderson, who praised Harold's integrity and kindness. She talked to the blacksmith, who said Harold always paid his bills on time and treated his horses well. The owner of the general store mentioned that Harold had been buying curtain fabric and dishes, clearly preparing for a bride. Even the local minister, a kind man named Pastor Williams, spoke highly of Harold's character, noting that he attended services regularly and had donated money to help a family whose house had burned down. Every person Katherine spoke with painted the same picture of a good, honest man trying to build a life. Either Harold was an exceptional liar who had fooled an entire town, or he was telling the truth about his innocence. During this week, Harold courted Katherine properly. He brought her wildflowers that somehow survived in the desert heat. He took her on a picnic by a small creek a few miles from town. He cooked her dinner at his ranch, and the meal was simple but carefully prepared. He asked her questions about her life in Boston, her parents, her dreams. He listened with genuine interest, and Katherine found herself opening up to him in ways she had not expected. On the 8th evening after her arrival, Katherine and Harold sat on his porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the heat of the day was finally beginning to ease. "Katherine," Harold said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Katherine's heart skipped. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," Harold said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability of the admission. "I know the circumstances are complicated, and I know you are still deciding whether to trust me fully. But I need you to know that my feelings are real. When I wrote to you, I hoped for companionship and partnership. What I am finding is so much more than that." Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest. Over the past week, she had been fighting her own growing feelings, afraid to let herself care for someone whose future was so uncertain. But hearing Harold speak the words aloud made something inside her settle. "I am afraid," Katherine admitted. "I am afraid of caring for you and then losing you, either because you are taken away to face trial or because I discover you have been lying all along." "Those are reasonable fears," Harold said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was rough from work but warm. "All I can do is continue being honest with you and hope that eventually you will trust me enough to take the risk." Katherine looked at their joined hands. "I think I am already taking the risk," she said softly. "I think I have been taking it since the moment I decided not to turn you in immediately." Harold squeezed her hand gently. "Then let me make you a promise. Regardless of what happens with my past, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the faith you are placing in me. I will work to build us a good life here, and I will love you with everything I have." Katherine turned to look at him, and in the fading light she saw a man who was sincere and hopeful and terrified all at once. She made a decision. "Ask me," Katherine said. Harold blinked, confused. "Ask you what?" "You brought me here to be your bride," Katherine said. "If you truly want to marry me, knowing that I know the truth about who you are, then ask me properly." Understanding dawned on Harold's face. He stood, drawing Katherine up with him. Then, to her surprise, he dropped to one knee right there on the porch. "Katherine Langley," Harold said, his voice rough with emotion, "you are the bravest, most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You have shown me more kindness and understanding than I had any right to expect. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, knowing all that you know, trusting that I will spend my life proving that I am worthy of you?" Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Harrison Adler or Harold Ashford or whatever name you choose to go by. I will marry the man you are." Harold rose and pulled her into his arms. For a moment, they simply held each other as the last light faded from the sky. Then Harold tilted her face up and kissed her softly, sweetly, with a tenderness that made Katherine's heart ache. "When?" Harold asked when they finally pulled apart. "Soon," Katherine said. "I do not want to wait. We have already wasted enough time being afraid." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Martha and her husband standing as witnesses. Katherine wore a dress she had made herself in Boston, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Harold wore his best suit, and his hands shook slightly as he placed a simple gold band on her finger. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity, speaking about faith, trust, and the courage it takes to build a life with another person. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Harold kissed Katherine with such joy that several people in the small congregation laughed affectionately. The town threw them a modest celebration at the community hall. Someone brought out a fiddle, and there was dancing and food. Katherine was introduced to ranchers and miners, shopkeepers and their wives. Everyone welcomed her warmly, and Katherine began to understand what life in this small community would be like. It was nothing like Boston's anonymity, but there was something appealing about being part of a place where people looked out for one another. As the evening wound down, Harold and Katherine rode back to the ranch together in the wagon. Katherine was now Mrs. Katherine Ashford, at least as far as Hawthorne was concerned. Mrs. Katherine Adler in truth, though that name would remain their secret. That night, in the modest bedroom Harold had prepared, they came together as husband and wife. Harold was gentle and patient, taking time to ease Katherine's nervousness. What followed was tender and passionate, a claiming and a surrender all at once. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Katherine felt a sense of rightness that dispelled many of her lingering doubts. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their life. Katherine learned the demands of ranch life, which were considerable. She tended the chickens, helped with cooking and preserving food for winter, and began attempting a garden in a sheltered area near the house. Harold taught her to ride properly, and Katherine discovered she had an affinity for horses. She was not as confident with cattle, but Harold patiently showed her the basics of managing the herd. They worked side by side during the day, and in the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. Harold told her stories about his childhood in Virginia, about how he had come west at 19 seeking opportunity. Katherine shared memories of her parents, her mother's skill with a needle that Katherine had inherited, her father's love of books. One evening in late October, as the first hints of winter began to cool the desert air, Katherine brought up something that had been on her mind. "Harold, what if we could prove your innocence?" Katherine asked. "What if there was a way to clear your name so we could stop looking over our shoulders?" Harold was mending a piece of tack, but he paused at her words. "I have thought about it constantly for 2 years, but I do not see how. Sutton's word against mine, and he had the advantage of being believed from the start. But there must be something," Katherine insisted. "Some piece of evidence, some witness that could contradict his story. What about the gun? You said it was yours, but that Sutton must have stolen it. Did anyone see him with it before that night?" "I do not know," Harold admitted. "I was focused on my work in those final weeks. I did not notice the gun was missing until it was too late." "What about motive?" Katherine pressed. "Surely the law would investigate why Sutton killed his partner. Did he gain control of the ranch after Mr. Price's death?" Harold's eyes widened slightly. "I do not know. I ran before any of that could be sorted out. But you are right, that would be important. If Sutton benefited financially from Price's death, that would support my account." Katherine felt a spark of hope. "Is there anyone from the ranch who might have believed you? Anyone who might have seen or heard something that could help?" Harold thought for a long moment. "There was one man, a ranch hand named Thomas Gray. He was older, more observant than most. He did not join the others in condemning me right away. He asked questions, wanted to know more details, but I do not know what happened to him after I left." "Could we find him?" Katherine asked. "Katherine, it is too dangerous," Harold said immediately. "Going back to Carson City, asking questions, it would only draw attention. If someone recognized me, I would be arrested immediately." "Then I will go," Katherine said. Harold stared at her. "Absolutely not. I will not put you in danger." "There is no danger to me," Katherine argued. "No one knows who I am. I could go to Carson City, ask questions as a stranger, see what I can learn. If there is evidence that could clear your name, we need to find it. And if you are caught asking the wrong questions, if Sutton realizes someone is investigating—" Harold's voice was sharp with fear. "I will not risk you, Katherine. I would rather spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder than see you harmed." Katherine moved to sit beside him, taking his hands in hers. "Harold, I love you, but I do not want to live in fear forever. Our children, when we have them, should not grow up with a father who might be taken away at any moment. If there is even a chance of clearing your name, we have to try." Harold closed his eyes, conflict clear on his face. "I cannot lose you. You are everything to me." "You will not lose me," Katherine said firmly. "I will be careful. I will ask questions subtly, pretend to be a writer researching stories of the West, or a distant relation of Mr. Price trying to understand what happened. No one will suspect anything." They argued about it for several more hours, but Katherine was persistent. Finally, Harold relented, though his reluctance was evident in every line of his body. "If you are going to do this, we do it carefully," Harold said. "You do not go alone. We hire someone trustworthy to accompany you. You stay in a respectable hotel and do not take any unnecessary risks. And if at any point things seem dangerous, you leave immediately." "Agreed," Katherine said. Over the next few days, they made their plans. Harold asked around discreetly and found a man named Pete Morgan, a former Army scout who now worked as a guide and guard for travelers. Pete was in his 50s, weathered but capable, and Harold knew him to be honest. They explained that Katherine needed to travel to Carson City on family business and wanted protection for the journey. Pete agreed for a reasonable fee. Before Katherine left, Harold held her close for a long moment. "Please be careful," he whispered into her hair. "Come back to me." "I will," Katherine promised. "I am not going to lose you or the life we are building. This is for our future." The journey to Carson City took 3 days by stage. Pete proved to be a quiet but reliable companion, keeping watch at stops and ensuring Katherine was comfortable. When they arrived in Carson City, Katherine was struck by how much larger it was than Hawthorne. The streets were busy with commerce, and there were several grand buildings that spoke to the town's prosperity. Katherine checked into a hotel under her maiden name, Langley, to avoid any possible connection. She told the clerk she was a writer from back east researching notable events for a book about Nevada history. The clerk, a chatty young man, was immediately helpful, suggesting several stories she might find interesting. "There was a murder a couple years back that caused quite a stir," he said. "A wealthy rancher killed by his own foreman. Shocking, really." "Oh," Katherine said, feigning casual interest. "What happened?" "Edmund Price, one of the most respected men in the area, shot dead in his own office. His business partner caught the foreman, fellow named Harrison Adler, standing over the body. Adler ran before the law could arrest him properly. There is still a reward out for his capture." "How terrible," Katherine said. "Was the case ever fully investigated?" The clerk shrugged. "I suppose so. The partner, Victor Sutton, took over the ranch. He sold it a few months later and moved on. Some said he could not bear to stay after what happened." "Is there anyone still in town who knew Mr. Price well?" Katherine asked. "I would love to interview someone who could speak to his character." The clerk thought for a moment. "You might try the land office. Price did a lot of business there. Or the Silver Dollar Saloon. That is where a lot of the ranchers and businessmen gather." Katherine thanked him and went to her room to plan her next steps. She spent the afternoon visiting the land office, where she spoke with a clerk who had known Price. The man spoke glowingly of Price's integrity and business acumen, but he had nothing useful to say about the night of the murder. That evening, Katherine asked Pete to accompany her to the Silver Dollar Saloon. As a woman, she would not normally enter such an establishment alone, but with Pete as her escort and her stated purpose of research, it was marginally acceptable. The saloon was busy, filled with men drinking and playing cards. Katherine felt many eyes on her as she entered, but she kept her head high and approached the bartender. "Good evening," she said. "I am researching events in Nevada history for a book. I understand a man named Edmund Price was killed here in Carson City a couple years ago. I am hoping to speak with anyone who knew him." The bartender, a large man with a scarred face, studied her for a moment. "You are a bit late. Most folks who were close to Price have moved on." "Is there anyone at all who might remember the incident?" Katherine pressed. The bartender gestured to a corner table where an older man sat nursing a whiskey. "Thomas Gray worked on Price's ranch for years. He is usually here most evenings." Katherine's heart leaped. This was the man Harold had mentioned. She thanked the bartender and approached Gray's table carefully. "Mr. Gray," she said, "may I speak with you for a few moments? I am researching the death of Edmund Price for a book I am writing." Gray looked up at her with rheumy eyes. He was perhaps 60, with the weathered look of a man who had spent his life outdoors. "What is there to write about?" "Man was killed by someone he trusted. End of story." "May I sit?" Katherine asked. When Gray shrugged, she settled into the chair across from him, with Pete standing watchfully nearby. "I am interested in the details. I understand a man named Harrison Adler was accused of the murder." At the mention of Harold's real name, something flickered in Gray's expression. "That is what Victor Sutton claimed." "You sound skeptical," Katherine observed carefully. Gray took a long drink of his whiskey. "I worked with Harrison Adler for 3 years. He was a good man, fair and honest. Price trusted him completely. I never believed he would kill the boss, especially not for money. Harrison was not the type." Katherine's pulse quickened. "Did you say that to the authorities?" "I did," Gray said. "But Sutton was convincing, and he had that gun as evidence. Harrison's gun. Hard to argue with that." "But something bothered you," Katherine said. Gray met her eyes directly. "I saw Sutton coming out of the bunkhouse the day before the murder. He had no reason to be there. We found out later that Harrison's gun was missing from his room. At the time, Harrison thought he had misplaced it, but I always wondered if Sutton took it then, planning ahead." Katherine's breath caught. "Did you tell this to anyone?" "I tried," Gray said bitterly. "But by then, Sutton had sold the ranch and left town. And without Harrison around to support my suspicions, no one wanted to believe that a respected businessman had committed murder. It was easier to think the foreman did it." "Where did Sutton go?" Katherine asked urgently. "Last I heard, he was in Sacramento, bought into some shipping business," Gray said. He leaned forward. "Why are you really asking about this, miss? You do not seem like a writer to me." Katherine made a quick decision. "I know Harrison Adler. I know he is innocent. I am trying to find proof that will clear his name." Gray's eyebrows rose. "He is alive then?" "Where?" "I cannot tell you that," Katherine said. "But if you believe he is innocent, would you be willing to testify to what you saw, about Sutton being in the bunkhouse, about your doubts?" Gray was quiet for a long moment. "If it would help Harrison, yes, he deserves justice. Price's death broke something in that ranch, and Harrison did not cause it. Sutton did." Katherine could have kissed the old man. "Thank you. Can you think of any other evidence, anything else that might help?" "There was one thing," Gray said slowly. "Price and Sutton had a heated argument the week before the murder. I overheard part of it. Price said something about dissolving the partnership, that he had proof Sutton was embezzling. I did not think much of it at the time, but after Price died, I wondered if that proof still existed somewhere." "What happened to Price's papers and belongings?" Katherine asked. "Sutton claimed them all as the surviving partner. If there was evidence of embezzlement, he probably destroyed it." Katherine's mind raced. She had Gray's testimony, which was valuable but might not be enough. She needed more. "Is there anyone else who might have information? Anyone who worked closely with either Price or Sutton?" "Price's lawyer might know something," Gray suggested. "Andrew Kerrigan has an office on Main Street. He handled all of Price's legal affairs." Katherine thanked Gray profusely and left him with money for his drinks. As she and Pete walked back toward the hotel, her mind was spinning with possibilities. The next morning, she would visit the lawyer. Andrew Kerrigan's office was on the second floor of a building that housed several professional practices. Katherine climbed the stairs and found herself in a small, neat waiting area. A secretary, a young woman with sharp eyes, asked her business. "I need to speak with Mr. Kerrigan about the Edmund Price estate," Katherine said. "It is a matter of some urgency." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I believe Mr. Kerrigan will want to hear what I have to say." The secretary disappeared into an inner office. After a few minutes, she returned and gestured for Katherine to enter. Andrew Kerrigan was a man of perhaps 45, with graying hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He stood as Katherine entered and offered his hand. "Good morning, Miss Langley," he said, having apparently gotten her name from the hotel through some network Katherine did not understand. "My secretary says you wish to discuss the Price estate. I must tell you that matter was settled over a year ago." "I understand," Katherine said, settling into the chair he offered. but I have reason to believe Edmund Price's death was not properly investigated. I believe Harrison Adler was innocent and that Victor Sutton was the true murderer." Kerrigan's expression became very still. "That is quite an accusation." "I have spoken with Thomas Gray, who has raised several suspicious points about Sutton's behavior," Katherine said. "But I need more evidence. I need proof. Mr. Gray mentioned that Mr. Price spoke of having proof that Sutton was embezzling." "Do you know anything about that?" Kerrigan was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he said, "Miss Langley, what is your real interest in this case?" Katherine made a calculated decision to trust him. "I am married to Harrison Adler. He has been living under an assumed name, trying to build a new life. But we cannot truly move forward while this accusation hangs over him. He is innocent, and I am trying to prove it." Kerrigan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You are taking a considerable risk admitting that to me." "I could send for the marshal right now." "You could," Katherine agreed, "but I do not think you will. I think you have had doubts about what happened that night." Kerrigan sighed heavily. "I have had many doubts. Edmund was my friend as well as my client. The story never sat right with me. Harrison Adler was not a violent man, and he had no reason to kill Edmund. But I had no proof of any alternative, and Victor Sutton was very convincing." "What about the embezzlement?" Katherine pressed. "Did Mr. Price discuss it with you?" "He did," Kerrigan admitted. "He came to me about 2 weeks before his death. He had discovered discrepancies in the ranch accounts, money that should have been there but was not. He believed Victor was siphoning funds. Edmund asked me to conduct a quiet investigation and prepare papers to dissolve the partnership." Katherine's heart raced. "Do you still have those papers? Any documentation of the embezzlement?" "I have my notes from our conversation and some preliminary analysis of the ranch finances that Edmund provided," Kerrigan said. "But it is not conclusive proof of theft, and it certainly does not prove that Sutton committed murder." "But it establishes motive," Katherine said. "If Sutton knew that Price was planning to dissolve the partnership and expose him as a thief, that gives him a reason to want Price dead." "It does," Kerrigan agreed. "But would it be enough to reopen the case and clear Harrison's name? I do not know." "Will you help us?" Katherine asked directly. "Will you provide your testimony and documentation to support Harrison's innocence?" Kerrigan removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. "Edmund was a good man. He deserves justice, and if Harrison is truly innocent, then seeing him hang for a crime he did not commit would be a terrible wrong." He replaced his spectacles and looked at Katherine with determination. "Yes, I will help. But we will need to do this properly, through official legal channels." Over the next hour, Katherine and Kerrigan discussed their strategy. They would need to petition for the case to be reopened, presenting new evidence that cast doubt on Sutton's version of events. Gray's testimony about Sutton being in the bunkhouse, Kerrigan's evidence of Price's plan to expose Sutton for embezzlement, and potentially other witnesses who could speak to Harrison's character would all be important. "There is one more thing," Kerrigan said. "If we are going to do this, Harrison will need to turn himself in voluntarily. He cannot remain a fugitive while we fight for his exoneration. It shows good faith, and it allows him to face the charges properly." Katherine felt cold fear wash over her. "If he turns himself in, he could be convicted and hanged before we can prove his innocence." "It is a risk," Kerrigan acknowledged, "but it is necessary. No judge will reopen the case if the accused is still running, and I will do everything in my power to ensure Harrison gets a fair trial." Katherine knew Kerrigan was right, but the thought of Harold in jail, possibly facing execution, made her feel ill. Still, this might be their only chance at a real future. "I will discuss it with him," Katherine said. "If he agrees, how would we proceed? Bring him to me first," Kerrigan said. I will arrange for him to surrender to a judge I trust, one who will ensure he is treated fairly. I will file a motion to reopen the case based on new evidence. It will take time, possibly several months, but if we can track down Victor Sutton and force him to answer questions about the embezzlement and his whereabouts when the gun was stolen, we might be able to break his story. Katherine left Kerrigan's office with her mind whirling. She had found more than she had hoped for: a credible witness, documentation of motive, and a lawyer willing to fight for Harold's innocence. But the cost would be Harold's freedom, at least temporarily. She and Pete began the journey back to Hawthorne the next day. Katherine spent the long hours in the stage, rehearsing how she would explain everything to Harold, how she would convince him that this was their best path forward. When she finally arrived home, Harold was waiting on the porch. He had clearly been watching for her because he came running as soon as the wagon pulled up. He swept Katherine into his arms, holding her tightly. "Thank God," he breathed. "I have been going mad with worry." "I am fine," Katherine assured him. "And I have news. Let us go inside." They sat at their kitchen table, and Katherine recounted everything she had learned. She told him about Gray's testimony, about Kerrigan's evidence of the embezzlement, about the lawyer's willingness to help. Harold listened intently, hope and fear warring on his face. Then Katherine told him about Kerrigan's condition, that Harold turn himself in. Harold went pale. "Katherine, if I surrender, they could hang me. All the evidence in the world might not be enough if a jury wants to believe I am guilty." "I know," Katherine said, gripping his hands. "But Kerrigan is right. We cannot clear your name while you are a fugitive. This is our chance, Harold, our chance to stop hiding, to give our future children a father with a clean name." "Our children," Harold repeated softly. His hand moved to Katherine's stomach. "Are you telling me something?" "No," Katherine said, though she blushed. "Not yet, but someday, I hope. And when that day comes, I want them to have a father who is free, not one looking over his shoulder constantly." Harold was quiet for a long time, his expression tortured. Finally, he said, "If I do this, if I turn myself in and things go badly, promise me you will not wait for me. Promise me you will move on and build a good life." "I will not promise that," Katherine said fiercely, "because I believe in your innocence and I believe we will prove it. And I will be by your side through every moment of this fight." Harold pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do," Katherine said. "You deserve justice and happiness and a life without fear. We both do." They spent 3 more days at the ranch, putting affairs in order. Harold arranged for a neighbor, a kind rancher named Jack Bennett, to look after the cattle and horses while they were gone. Katherine packed carefully, unsure how long they would be away. On their final night in their home, they made love with an intensity born of fear and hope, clinging to each other as though they could hold back the uncertain future. The journey back to Carson City felt far too quick. Harold was quiet, withdrawn into his thoughts. Katherine tried to offer reassurance, but she knew her words could only do so much. The reality of what they were about to do loomed over them both. They went directly to Andrew Kerrigan's office. The lawyer greeted them gravely and spent some time speaking with Harold, asking detailed questions about the night of the murder and the weeks leading up to it. Katherine could see that Kerrigan was evaluating Harold, determining whether he believed in his innocence. Finally, Kerrigan said, "I will help you. I believe your account, and I believe we can cast enough doubt on Sutton's version of events to win your freedom. But I must be honest with you, Mr. Adler. This will be difficult and there are no guarantees." "I understand," Harold said. "But I am tired of running. I want my life back. I want a future with my wife." Kerrigan nodded. "Then let us begin. I have arranged for you to surrender to Judge Carson. He is a fair man, and he has agreed to review the new evidence before setting a trial date. He will likely hold you in custody, but I will argue that Katherine can post bond given your voluntary surrender. The process of turning himself in was surreal. Judge Carson, a stern man in his 60s, listened as Harold identified himself as Harrison Adler and admitted he was wanted in connection with Edmund Price's murder. Katherine watched as her husband was placed in handcuffs, and it took all her strength not to cry. The judge reviewed Kerrigan's preliminary filing about new evidence and agreed to set a bond, though it was high. Katherine had to use nearly all their savings to secure Harold's release, but she did it without hesitation. Harold would be confined to Carson City and required to check in with the marshal daily, but at least he would not be in a cell. Over the weeks that followed, Kerrigan built their case methodically. He deposed Thomas Gray, documenting his testimony about Sutton's suspicious behavior. He subpoenaed ranch records from the time of Price's death, showing the financial discrepancies Price had discovered. He tracked down other ranch hands who, when pressed, admitted they had always found it strange that Harrison would commit murder given his character. The hardest part was locating Victor Sutton. Kerrigan hired investigators who eventually found him in Sacramento, living comfortably on the proceeds from selling Price's ranch and his new shipping venture. When Sutton was served with a subpoena to testify at Harrison's trial, he initially refused, claiming the matter was closed. But Kerrigan persisted, and eventually, the court compelled Sutton to appear. The trial was set for late January, which meant Harold and Katherine spent Christmas in Carson City, far from their home. It was a subdued holiday, marked by worry and uncertainty. But on Christmas morning, Harold gave Katherine a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a delicate silver locket. "I want you to have this," Harold said quietly. "Whatever happens in the trial, I want you to have something to remember me by." "Do not talk like that," Katherine said, though tears filled her eyes. "We are going to win this." "I hope so," Harold said. "But if we do not, I need you to know that these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You took a chance on me when you had every reason not to. You believed in me. That is more than I ever expected to find." Katherine opened the locket and found space inside for photographs, though they were currently empty. "When this is over," she said firmly, "we are going to fill this with pictures of our family, of our children and our life together on the ranch. This is not an ending, Harold. It is a beginning." The trial began on a cold January morning. The courthouse was packed with people curious about the case that was reopening a murder from 2 years prior. Katherine sat in the front row, her hands clenched in her lap as Harold was led in. The prosecutor, a sharp man named Douglas Winters, presented the original case against Harold. He showed the jury the gun that had killed Edmund Price, Harold's gun. He called witnesses who testified that Harold had fled the scene, which suggested guilt. He painted a picture of a foreman who had killed his employer, possibly for money or in a dispute. But then it was Kerrigan's turn, and Katherine watched as her husband's lawyer systematically dismantled Sutton's story. Kerrigan called Thomas Gray, who testified about seeing Sutton emerge from the bunkhouse the day before the murder, right around the time Harold's gun went missing. He testified about the argument he had overheard between Price and Sutton about embezzlement. Kerrigan presented his analysis of the ranch finances, showing clear evidence that someone had been stealing from the operation. He called other ranch hands who testified to Harold's good character and their surprise at the accusation. And then Victor Sutton took the stand. Sutton was a well-dressed man in his mid-40s, smooth and confident. He told his version of events calmly, describing how he had walked into Price's office and found Harold standing over the body with the gun. He denied all accusations of embezzlement, claiming the financial discrepancies could be explained by poor record keeping. But Kerrigan was relentless in his cross-examination. "Mr. Sutton, is it not true that Edmund Price was planning to dissolve your partnership?" "We had disagreements, but nothing so serious," Sutton said smoothly. "Is it not true that he had discovered you were stealing from the ranch?" "That is absurd," Sutton said, his composure slipping slightly. Kerrigan produced the documents from Price's lawyer, showing Price's intent to dissolve the partnership and expose the theft. "If Edmund Price had lived to make these accusations public, you would have been ruined, would you not?" "This is speculation," Sutton protested. "Is it speculation that you gained control of the entire ranch operation after Price's death, that you sold it for a considerable profit and moved on to a new venture?" Sutton's face reddened. "I was the surviving partner. The ranch was mine to do with as I saw fit." "Convenient that your partner died just as he was about to expose your crimes," Kerrigan said quietly. The prosecutor objected, and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Sutton's discomfort, his evasiveness. Kerrigan continued methodically, asking Sutton to explain in detail the layout of the ranch, the timing of events the night of the murder, and specifically why he had been in the bunkhouse the day before. Sutton's answers became increasingly inconsistent, and several times he contradicted himself. Finally, Kerrigan played his strongest card. "Mr. Sutton, you testified that you found Harrison Adler standing over Edmund Price's body with the gun still in his hand. Is that correct?" "Yes," Sutton said firmly. "And yet, the ranch hands who arrived moments later testified that they found the gun on the floor, several feet from the body. If Adler was holding it when you arrived, why was it on the floor when others entered?" Sutton paled. "I must have misremembered. It was a traumatic situation." "Or perhaps you are lying," Kerrigan said. "Perhaps you shot Edmund Price yourself, and when Harrison Adler entered the room, you dropped the gun and immediately accused him to deflect suspicion from yourself." "That is not what happened," Sutton insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. The trial lasted 5 days. Katherine sat through every moment, watching her husband's fate play out. Harold testified in his own defense, describing what he had seen and heard that night with quiet sincerity. He admitted to running, acknowledged it made him look guilty, but maintained his innocence with unwavering consistency. When both sides rested, the jury deliberated for nearly 8 hours. Katherine sat with Harold in a small room adjacent to the courtroom, holding his hand and praying silently. Finally, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. They filed back into the courtroom, and Katherine felt as though she could not breathe as the foreman stood. "We find the defendant, Harrison Adler, not guilty of the murder of Edmund Price." Katherine gasped, tears streaming down her face. Harold's eyes closed and his entire body sagged with relief. Around them, the courtroom erupted in conversation. Kerrigan was shaking Harold's hand, congratulating him. But there was more. The judge called for order and then turned to Victor Sutton, who had gone white as a sheet. "Mr. Sutton, based on the evidence presented in this trial, I am ordering the marshal to take you into custody on suspicion of murder and embezzlement. You will stand trial for the death of Edmund Price." Sutton tried to run, but the marshal grabbed him. As he was led away in handcuffs, he was screaming protests, claiming innocence, but no one believed him anymore. Harold pulled Katherine into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "It is over," he whispered. "My God, it is really over." "You are free," Katherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are free." They stayed in Carson City long enough for the paperwork to be completed, for Harold's name to be officially cleared. Judge Carson apologized personally for the miscarriage of justice Harold had suffered. Kerrigan refused to accept payment beyond his basic fees, saying that justice had been payment enough. Thomas Gray sought them out before they left, shaking Harold's hand firmly. "I am glad the truth came out," the old man said. "Edmund would be glad too." The journey back to Hawthorne felt like flying. Harold and Katherine could not stop smiling, could not stop touching each other to confirm this was real. When they finally arrived at their ranch, everything looked exactly as they had left it, but somehow it felt completely different. This was truly theirs now, without the shadow of fear hanging over it. That night they celebrated their freedom properly. They made love with joy and abandon, and afterward, as they lay tangled together, Harold said, "I want to use my real name now. I want to be Harrison Adler again." "Then that is who you will be," Katherine said. "Though I have grown rather fond of calling you Harold." "You can call me whatever you like," Harold said with a laugh. "I am yours completely, whatever name I go by." They decided to tell people in Hawthorne the truth. Word of the trial had already spread through newspapers, and it seemed better to be honest than to maintain the fiction. To Katherine's relief, their neighbors were understanding and supportive. Martha Henderson hugged them both, saying she had always known Harold was a good man, and his true name did not change that. Life settled into a new rhythm. Spring came to the Nevada desert, bringing wildflowers and new calves. Harold expanded the herd and began breaking horses to sell, a skill he had always enjoyed. Katherine's garden flourished beyond her expectations, providing fresh vegetables. And in early summer, Katherine confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She was pregnant. Harold's reaction was everything she had hoped for. He spun her around in his arms, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, as though he could not quite believe it. Katherine gave birth the following February to a healthy baby boy. They named him Edmund Thomas Adler, honoring both the man whose murder Harrison had been falsely accused of and the ranch hand whose testimony had helped clear his name. Holding their son for the first time, Katherine looked at Harold and saw tears streaming down his face. "2 years ago I thought my life was over," he said quietly. "I thought I would spend the rest of my days running and hiding, and now look at us. A beautiful wife, a son, a home. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "We fought for this," Katherine reminded him. "We took risks and believed in each other even when it was difficult." "You took the biggest risk," Harold said. "You stepped off that stage with my wanted poster in your bag, and instead of turning me in, you gave me a chance. You changed my entire life, Katherine." "You changed mine too," Katherine said softly. "I came here expecting a convenient marriage, a practical arrangement. What I found was love and partnership and a future worth fighting for." Edmund grew into a healthy, rambunctious toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. 2 years after his birth, Katherine gave birth to twin girls, whom they named Margaret Rose and Clara Jane. The house that had once seemed spacious now rang with children's laughter and chaos. Harold expanded the ranch steadily, hiring hands to help with the growing operation. Thomas Gray eventually moved to Hawthorne to help with the horses, becoming like family to them. He delighted in the children, telling them stories about their father's bravery and honesty. Victor Sutton was convicted of Edmund Price's murder and hanged, finally receiving justice for his crimes. Harold attended the execution, needing closure. Afterward, he told Katherine that while he took no joy in Sutton's death, he felt that Edmund could finally rest in peace. Years passed in the way they do on a working ranch, filled with hard labor and small joys. Harold taught Edmund to ride and rope, passing on skills the boy absorbed eagerly. The twins were fearless, climbing everything and keeping Katherine constantly busy. Two more children followed, another boy named Jacob and finally a daughter named Hannah. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harold and Katherine sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had on the evening Harold had proposed. The porch had been expanded to accommodate a growing family, and there were toys scattered across it, evidence of their children's play. "Do you ever regret it?" Harold asked quietly. "Taking that risk on me?" Katherine looked at her husband, at the silver threads now visible in his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes from years of smiling. She thought about everything they had built together, the family they had created, the love that had sustained them through difficulties. "Not for a single moment," Katherine said. "You were worth every risk, every moment of fear. This life we have built together is worth everything." Harold took her hand, the same gesture he had made years ago when asking her to marry him. "I love you, Harrison Adler. I loved you when you confronted me with that wanted poster, when you chose to believe in me, when you fought to clear my name. And I love you now, surrounded by our family and our life. I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Katherine said. "My wanted man who turned out to be exactly the man I needed." As the sun set behind the Nevada mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, their children called them inside for dinner. Katherine and Harold stood, hands linked, and walked into their home filled with warmth and love and the laughter of family. The wanted poster that had once threatened to destroy everything had instead led Katherine to her truest happiness, to a man worth fighting for, and to a love that had conquered fear and doubt to create something beautiful. In the years that followed, the ranch prospered and their children grew. Edmund became a skilled rancher like his father, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operation. The twins, Margaret and Clara, were inseparable and shared their mother's business sense, helping manage the financial side of the ranch. Jacob became a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend college, while Hannah inherited her mother's skill with a needle and opened a dress shop in Hawthorne. Harold and Katherine grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became known throughout the region as a couple whose partnership was the foundation of their success. Young couples would seek their advice, and Katherine would always tell the same story. "Trust your instincts, believe in the good in people, and fight for what matters most." On a warm spring day in 1922, exactly 40 years after Katherine had stepped off that stage clutching a wanted poster, Harold passed away peacefully in his sleep with Katherine holding his hand. He was 70 years old and had lived a full, free life surrounded by love. Katherine lived another 5 years, spending her time with her children and the grandchildren who adored her. She kept the wanted poster, now yellowed and fragile, in a frame in her bedroom alongside the silver locket Harold had given her that Christmas in Carson City. The locket now held photographs of their entire family, just as she had once promised. When Katherine passed away in 1927 at the age of 67, she was buried next to Harold on a hill overlooking their ranch. Their children gathered there, along with dozens of grandchildren, to remember a love story that had begun with doubt and fear, but had transformed into something legendary. Edmund, now a man in his 40s with children of his own, stood at his parents' graves and told his children the story he had heard countless times growing up. He told them about a young woman brave enough to confront a wanted man, about a man innocent of crimes accused against him, about a love that had been tested by impossible odds and had emerged stronger. "Your grandmother always said that the best things in life require courage," Edmund told his children. She stepped off that stage not knowing if she would be safe, but she chose to seek truth rather than accept easy answers. And your grandfather, knowing he could be hanged, chose to fight for his innocence rather than live in fear. Together, they built all of this. He gestured to the ranch spread out below them, to the house that had been expanded multiple times over the years, to the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. This is their legacy. Not just the land or the success, but the example of what two people can accomplish when they believe in each other. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived carrying a wanted poster and the cowboy who froze when he saw it became part of Hawthorne's history. It was told around campfires and dinner tables, passed down through generations. Some details became exaggerated with time, but the heart of the story remained true. A testament to courage, to faith in the face of doubt, and to a love powerful enough to overcome the darkest accusations. The ranch remained in the Adler family for generations, a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. And though the wanted poster eventually crumbled with age, the legacy of Katherine and Harrison's love endured, proving that even in the wild and unforgiving landscape of the Old West, true love could find a way to flourish and thrive, creating something permanent and precious that would outlast them both. Their story ended not with the fear and uncertainty of that first meeting, but with a life fully lived, a family blessed with their example, and a love that had truly conquered all.